The night the coldest woman in the Almont family claimed me in front of all of them, I was standing at the side of the great dining hall in an apron, because that is what I was to them. The girl who cooked the food, the girl who paid off a dead man's debt with her hands, the girl their younger daughter had decided she owned. Delphine Aumont, my girlfriend, if you can call a thing a girlfriend when she treats you like a line item, had just said something in front of the whole seated family about how I should be grateful, how a girl born owing this family should be glad to be kept at all. And the long table had laughed the small, comfortable laugh of people who have never once been for sale.
Welcome, everyone! Don't forget to subscribe to the channel!
And I stood there with a platter going cold in my hands, and my grandmother's brass tasting spoon in my apron pocket. And I did the thing I have done my whole life, the only thing that has ever been truly mine. I read the room by taste, the way I read everything, and under the wine and the candle smoke and Delphine's expensive contempt I tasted, coming off the head of the table where the eldest sister sat, something that had no business being there, not the boredom of a powerful woman at a family dinner. Fury, cold, and total and about to move. Sabine Aumont, the eldest, the heir, the one they called the frost of the house, because she had never in her life raised her voice or lost a thing she wanted, set down her glass at the head of that table, and pressed her thumb once to the thin platinum watch on her wrist, the tell I had found in another life and told no one, and did not let go. And then she stood, the whole cold length of her, and she looked down the table past her mother and past her sister to the girl in the apron holding a cooling platter, and she said, into a silence that dropped over that hall like a blade, "Take off the apron, Ione. You are not paying off anything to anyone in this house ever again. And Delphine, you never owned her." I'm going to tell you how a girl who cooked for the Aumont family paid off a debt that never existed, and was claimed at their own dinner table by the cold air her little sister had spent 2 years treating me like property in front of. But you have to let me go back, because nothing about that night makes sense until you understand the forged debt that bound me to the wrong sister, and the one summer before it, when the coldest woman in that house was, very secretly, the only one who ever saw me at all. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I want to back up first. My name is Ione Rourke, and I read taste. Not flavor, not the thing any good cook can name. The truth under it. Put a dish in front of me and I can taste, somewhere behind my sternum in a place that has no name, everything that went into it, and everyone whose hands it passed through. The tired, cheap oil hiding under the good, the fear in a sauce made by a cook about to be fired, the love in a loaf, the lie in a thing dressed up to look like more than it is. Taste keeps what is done to it. A person can plate a thing beautifully and call it whatever they like, but the truth of what is actually in it goes on the tongue and cannot be argued with. And I have been reading that truth since before I understood that not everyone could. My grandmother is the reason I can do it, and she is the reason you are going to believe the rest. So let me set her down properly. Nan raised me. My mother was a name and my father a kind, failing man who died owing money to people he should never have borrowed from. And Nan had spent 50 years in other people's kitchens, a cook whose name never once went on a menu. 50 years of making the warm thing that the people in the dining room never thought about. And somewhere in those 50 years, she learned to taste the truth of a thing, which Grand Estate's famous cellar was quietly watered, which Proud Family's recipe was a bought lie, which beautiful plate was covering something cheap and cold. She had a small brass tasting spoon, the bowl of it worn thin and warm from 50 years against her palm, and the first true memory I have of being myself is her folding my 2 small fingers around that spoon and holding it to my lips over a pot. "Taste doesn't lie about what's really in it, Ione," she would say. "People will lie to your face your whole life. They'll dress a cheap thing up in a silver dish and swear it's fine dining. But the truth of what's in it is on your tongue the second you taste it, and the tongue can't be fooled the way the eyes can." She made it ordinary, the way she made everything ordinary that might otherwise have set me apart. You just taste for what's really under it, child. Most folk are too busy admiring the plate. And I understand now that the ordinariness was the kindest, most protective thing she could have done, because she had seen what powerful families do to a poor, gifted girl who reads them too well. Nan died the winter I turned 20, and she left me the brass spoon and nothing else, because there was nothing else, only my father's debt, which was the thing that walked me straight through the service door of the Almond estate before I was 21, a cook come to pay off in her hands what a dead man had supposedly borrowed. I did not know, carrying my one bag up the service drive, that I was walking into the family that would take everything from me and then, 2 years later, hand a piece of it back at their own dinner table, with the whole house watching. There was exactly one kindness in that house, and I have to tell you about her now, because she saves everything at the end. Berta had been the head cook before me for 30 years, and when I arrived, a terrified orphan with a spoon and a debt, she did not treat me as competition or as a servant beneath her. She taught me the estate's great cold kitchens, and she fed me when I was too frightened to eat. And she was the only person in that house who ever once said my name as though it were a person's name and not a line item. She retired to the gatehouse my second year, her hands finally too stiff to work, and I brought her soup on my afternoons off. And she would hold my grandmother's brass spoon and say she had known cooks in her life who could taste a lie, and that I was the best of them. And I thought she was only being kind to a lonely girl. I did not know that Berta Vidal had been carrying, in a folder in her gatehouse, for 11 years, the one thing that could set me free, and the private shame of never having used it. Now I have to tell you about the Almonds, because you cannot understand the dinner until you understand the house. And it was the coldest house I have ever cooked in. They were old money and a great estate, and a name that opened doors across 3 countries. And they were ruled entirely by Madame Corisande Aumont, the mother, who ran her family the way she ran her cellars, by inventory, by leverage, by knowing exactly what everything was worth and never once paying more. She had 2 daughters. The younger was Delphine, and the elder was Sabine. And the whole house understood without anyone ever saying it that Delphine was the one their mother had made in her own image, and Sabine was the one she had made into a weapon. And I, the cook come to pay a debt, belonged in that arithmetic to no one at all, until Delphine Aumont walked into my kitchen one night for something sweet and decided, the way she decided everything, that the girl paying off her father's debt would make a convenient and biddable thing to keep. I want you to understand the temperature of that house, because it is the water everything after swam in. The Almonds did not raise their voices, and did not need to. Cruelty in that family was a matter of accounting, not passion. A footman who broke a glass had it taken from his wages with a smile. A gardener who grew old was pensioned to a cottage and never spoken to again. Warmth was a thing you were charged for. And into that cold ledger of a household came a girl with a dead father's debt, and a gift she was too smart to advertise. And I learned in my first month the same thing every poor gifted person learns in a house of the rich, that being able to taste the truth of them is worth nothing when you are the thing they have decided they own. I kept my head down. I cooked the warm things they never once thanked me. I read every cold room I walked into and said nothing. And I told myself the reading was its own quiet company. The way you tell yourself a thing you need to be true so you can rise before dawn and light the ovens again. I have to tell you about Delphine plainly, because I spent 2 years being owned by her, and I will not pretend it was love, not on her side and not by the end on mine. Delphine was beautiful and cold and shallow in the specific way of a person who has never once wanted a thing she could not simply be given. And what she wanted that night in my kitchen was me. Not because she saw me, but because I came, conveniently, already attached to a debt she could hold over my head. She did not have to court me. She had only to remind me, lightly, often, that my father's debt to her family was a great deal of money, and that a girl in my position was lucky to be wanted at all, and that gratitude was the least I could offer. And I was 21, and alone and terrified of the debt, And I told myself that being kept was a kind of safety, and I let Delphine Aumont fold me into her life the way you fold a napkin, decoratively, and to be used. I want to give you one small picture of what being owned by Delphine Aumont was actually like, because it was never loud, and that was the cruelty of it. She never struck me, she never raised her voice, she simply made sure in 100 light daily ways that I never forgot what I was. She would introduce me to her friends as my little cook. She's working off the most enormous debt. Isn't she sweet? And watch me hold my face still. She would leave a bill from the estate on my pillow now and then, the running total of what I supposedly still owed. Never a demand, just a reminder. A number that never seemed to go down no matter how many years I cooked. She would take my grandmother's brass spoon out of my apron pocket and turn it over in her fingers and say this old thing: "We really must get you proper equipment and hand it back," and never once know that she had just held the only thing in the world that was mine. She did not want me. She wanted the feeling of owning a person who had no choice but to be grateful. And I gave it to her for 2 years, because a girl who owns nothing and owes everything learns to call the cage safety. And I had gotten very good at not tasting my own life. Now I have to tell you about the other sister, because you cannot understand the dinner until you understand the one summer before the arithmetic closed over me. And it lasted exactly one summer. And I have never told a living soul about it until now. Sabine Aumont was the eldest and the heir. And she was. The whole house agreed in the frightened way people agree about the truly powerful, the coldest of them all. She had her mother's ambition, without her mother's appetite for cruelty, which in that house made her lonely rather than kind. And she moved through the estate the way weather moves, unhurried and untouchable. She had blue-black hair and the palest ice-gray eyes I have ever seen on a living person, and a thin platinum watch she pressed her thumb to once before she decided anything, the only tell she had, and I found it that first summer the way you find the one warm stone in a cold wall, because Sabine Aumont was the only person in that whole house who ever once came into my kitchen not to be served, but to talk. It started over a ruined sauce. She came in late one summer night, the heir who could have had anything sent up on a silver tray. And she stood in the doorway of my kitchen and watched me taste a thing and throw it out. And she said, "How did you know it was wrong?" And I told her the truth, which I had never once told anyone in that house, that it looked perfect and tasted of a lie, a cream gone quietly sour under the sugar, and that I could taste that kind of thing the way other people read a face. So I did. I made her taste 3 things blind and told her the truth of each: the good, the wired, the one I had cut on purpose to test her. And at the end, she set down the spoon and pressed her thumb to her platinum watch, once, and did not let go. That was the summer. It was a kitchen after midnight, and a garden wall where no one went, and the air of a cold house learning, for the first time in her life, what it was to sit with someone who could not be lied to, and did not want anything from her. She brought me the family's proud-bought things to taste for the truth. I told her which of the seller's legends were watered and which were real, and she laughed. Sabine Aumont, who the house swore had never laughed, a low, astonished thing, at how much of her family's grandeur was a beautiful plate over something cheap. She learned the truth of me, and I learned the tell of her watch. And somewhere in the middle of one summer, the cold air of the Aumont house and the cook, come to pay a debt, fell into the kind of thing that the people upstairs are never, ever allowed to keep. She told me once, on the garden wall at 2 a.m, that she had spent her whole life being the weapon her mother forged, and had never once been simply a person to anyone, and that in my kitchen she was, for an hour a night, allowed to be nothing but herself. I believed her, God help me. I believed her all the way down. I want to give you one night of that summer whole, because you have to feel what was real before you can understand what was stolen. It was laid on the garden wall behind the kitchens, the 2 of us where no one ever came, and I had a heel of good bread and a jar of honey I'd hidden from the pantry. And I fed her a piece in the dark the way you feed someone you have stopped being afraid of. And I watched the frost of the house close her eyes over a bite of bread and honey, like it was the first honest thing she had eaten in years. And I said the thing I had never said to anyone in that house. You taste like a person who's been hungry her whole life at a table full of food. Your mother did that. It isn't your nature. And Sabine Omont went very still on the wall beside me, and her thumb found her watch and pressed, and for the first time did not let go. And she said so quietly the garden almost took it. Nobody has ever tasted the difference. Everyone tastes the name and the money and the cold. And that was the night it stopped being a strange summer thing between a cook and an heir and became the thing that a cold woman with a ledger had already decided I was not going to be allowed to keep. And then, at the end of that summer, without a word to me, she was sent abroad to run the family's foreign holdings. And by the time she came back a year later, I belonged, on paper and in front of the whole house, to her little sister. I have pieced together, since, exactly how the arithmetic closed over me while Sabine was abroad. And it is a small masterpiece of a cold woman's cruelty. Madame Omont had watched the summer happen. Of course she had. Nothing happened in that house she did not inventory. She had watched her forged weapon of an elder daughter go soft over a cook at midnight. And she had understood, the way she understood everything, exactly how dangerous it was. Not the scandal, she did not care about that. But the fact of it, that Sabine had wanted something for herself, something Madame had not chosen and could not control. So she sent Sabine abroad on a pretext of business. And while the elder daughter was gone, she moved the debt. She let it be known to Delphine, bored, acquisitive Delphine, that the cook came attached to a large and convenient obligation, and she arranged, in her light inventory way, for me to be folded into the younger daughter's keeping, so that by the time Sabine came home, the one true thing she had ever wanted would already belong, irrevocably, and in front of the whole house, to her sister. It was never about Delphine wanting me. It was about making certain Sabine never could have me. I was not a person in that plan. I was a thing moved from one daughter's column to the other's to teach the dangerous daughter a lesson about wanting. I did not understand how it happened. That is the part that gnawed at me for 2 years. One summer, I was the cook. The cold air came to sea at midnight. And the next, I was Delphine's kept thing, folded into the younger sister's life by a debt that had somehow grown teeth while Sabine was gone. And Sabine came home from abroad, changed, colder, if that were possible, and she did not come to my kitchen at midnight anymore. And when we passed in the halls, her ice-gray eyes went over me the way they went over the furniture, and her thumb pressed her watch and did not let go. And I told myself the summer had been a thing she'd amused herself with and forgotten, a rich woman's diversion. And I folded that wound down small with all the others, and I went on cooking and belonging to Delphine, and paying a debt I had never actually seen written down. The hardest part of those 2 years was the halls. I would see her, Sabine, home from abroad, colder than the winter, at the far end of a corridor or across the great hall at some function, and she would be the frost the whole house feared, and her ice-gray eyes would pass over me exactly the way they passed over a chair. And I would stand there with my body remembering a garden wall and a jar of honey, and feel something in me go quietly to ash. I told myself the correct things, that the summer had been a diversion, that a woman like that does not remember a cook, that I had wanted her to be good so badly I had tasted something on her that was never there. It was the one time in my life I chose not to trust my own tongue, and it cost me 2 years. Because the truth, which I was too frightened and too owned to let myself taste, was that Sabine Omont walked those halls like ice precisely because she could not walk them any other way and survive what had been done to us both. She was not cold at me. She was cold because the alternative, in that house, in front of that mother, was to let them see exactly how much they had taken. Because that is the thing I want you to sit with. In 2 years of paying off my father's debt with my hands and my freedom, I had never once been shown the debt itself. I had been told the number, always by Madame Omont, always in that light inventory voice. And I had believed it the way a frightened poor girl believes a rich woman with a ledger. And I had never asked to see the paper, because asking felt like the kind of ingratitude that could put a girl who owns nothing out on the road. I cooked and I belonged, and I did not read the one thing I should have read, because they had never once let me near it. There was one night, about a year in, when the wrongness of it all nearly reached me, And I want to be honest that I felt it and pushed it down. I had cooked a great dinner, and Madame Omar had complimented the lamb, which she never did. And in the strange warmth of that, I had almost asked her lightly whether I might see the accounting of my father's debt, just to know how much was left, just to have a number I could hold. And I had smiled and cleared the plates. But I remember the taste of that moment, the small cold spike of fear under her voice, the specific flavor of a person guarding a lie, and I filed it away with all the other things I could not afford to know, and I went back to my kitchen, and I did not pull the thread, because pulling the thread felt like the kind of ingratitude that puts a girl out on the road. I know now what I tasted at that table. I know now it was the flavor of a forgery being protected. The dinner that changed everything was a formal one, the kind the Almonts held to remind 3 countries of what they were, and I had cooked for it for 3 days. And I was standing at the side of the hall in my apron, making sure the courses went out perfectly, when Delphine decided, in front of the whole seated family and a table of important guests, to make a small entertainment of me. It was nothing she hadn't done 100 times in private. A light, cruel remark about the cook who was working off her father's debt, about how one had to keep such girls grateful, about how lucky I was to be kept at all. But she did it out loud, at the great table, and the guests laughed, and I felt the old wound open. And I did the thing I do when the world is too much. I stood very still, and I read the room by taste and smell the way my grandmother taught me. And I tasted, coming off the head of the table where Sabine Aumont sat cold and silent. Not the boredom of a powerful woman, but a fury so total it had a floor. And Sabine Aumont set down her glass and pressed her thumb to her platinum watch and stood. "Take off the apron, Ione," she said, into a silence that fell over that hall like a dropped blade, and the whole table turned to stare at the eldest daughter who never raised her voice. And then she looked at her sister, at Delphine, with an ice I had never seen even in that cold house, and she said, "You never owned her." Madame Corisande Aumont rose at the head of her own table, smooth and cold and lethal, to do what she does, which is to make a scene disappear by force of will. "Sabine, sit down." And Sabine Aumont, the weapon her mother had forged, turned the whole of that forged edge on the woman who had made it, and said, in the voice that never rose, "Then let me embarrass us properly. Tell them about the debt, Mother. Tell them how much Ione Rourke's father actually owed this family. Because I have spent a year home from abroad quietly finding out, and the answer is nothing. He owed us nothing." The hall went utterly still, and I stood there in my half-untied apron, with the floor going out from under 2 years of my life, because I had never seen the debt, and now the coldest woman in the house was telling 3 countries' worth of important people that it had never existed at all. Madame Aumont's face did the thing I had only ever tasted and never seen, the cold, small calculation of a person who has been caught and is deciding in real time how much to concede. "There were additional considerations," she began, in the inventory voice, and Sabine cut her off with 4 words. "And then the old woman came in. Berta, the head cook before me, retired to the gatehouse years ago, 70 years old, and the only person in that whole estate who had ever been kind to me, came through the service door of the great hall in her good coat, shaking, with a folder held against her chest like something she had been carrying too long, because Sabine had sent for her. And she said, in a voice that carried down that silent table, 'I kept the real ledger. I kept it because I was there the night the debt was paid, 11 years ago, by that girl's father before he died, paid in full, with my own eyes as witness. And I was there the day Madame had a new ledger drawn up showing it still owing, so that when the girl came of age and came here to work it off, there would always be more to owe. I have both books, the real one and the forged one.' I took the ledgers from Berta's shaking hands, and I did the thing I do, because paper keeps what is done to it, and old paper most of all. I opened the forged book and I ran my thumb down the false column and I breathed it. And under the ink and the years I could taste, the way I taste a lie in a sauce, the particular cold, expensive nothing of the desk it had been forged on, the same cold I had been served at that table for 2 years, Madame Corisande Aumont, who had turned a paid debt into a leash and used it to fold a gifted orphan into her younger daughter's life like a napkin. I had the proof in my hands and the maker of it on my tongue, and I understood, standing in my half-untied apron, that I was never going to spend one more night of my life paying off a lie. I need you to understand what it is to have 2 years of your life turn over in a single breath. Standing there with the forged ledger in my hands, I was not only free, I was retasting everything. Every bill Delphine had left on my pillow, every time Madame had said the number in her cold inventory voice. Every morning I had risen before dawn, believing I owed these people my hands and my freedom and my whole young life. All of it built on a paper that Bertha had known was false for 11 years. I should have felt only rage, and part of me did, a clean, cold column of it. But under the rage was something stranger and more important. The specific grief of a person who has just learned that the cage she called safety was never even locked. I had been free the entire time. My father had paid. I had only ever needed to be shown the ledger, and they had spent 2 years in a forgery making certain I never was. Delphine, my girlfriend, if you can call her that, made the mistake of trying to save it the way her mother would. Ione, she said, light and wheedling, the way she spoke when she wanted a thing. This is a family matter. Come away. We'll sort out the money. None of it changes us. And I looked at the woman who had owned me for 2 years on the strength of a forgery, and I set the ledgers down on the great table, and I untied my apron the rest of the way, and I said, "You knew. Sabine just said it, and you didn't blink. You knew the debt was paid, and you let your mother hand me to you like a thing, and you spent 2 years making sure I felt grateful for it. That's not a family matter." Madame Aumont made her last move then, because women like her always have one more, and hers came at me quiet and cold across the wreck of her own dinner. "Fine," she said. "The debt is forgiven. It never existed. We all heard my daughter say so. The first time she had bought me with a forged debt and a frightened girl's ignorance. This time she put a clean severance on her own dinner table and waited for the cook to be sensible. And I looked at her, the woman who had turned my dead father's paid debt into 2 years of my life. And for the first time since I carried my one bag up the service drive, I was not the girl they walked quietly out through the kitchen door. "You already bought me once with a lie," I said. "It's the most expensive thing you ever wasted your money on, because it just cost you both your daughters in front of everyone you wanted to impress. I'm not for sale, I never was." And Sabine Aumont came down the length of that great table then, past her mother, and past her sister, and past 40 years of the Aumont name. And she stopped in front of the girl in the untied apron, close enough that I could read her with nothing in the way. And what came off her was not the cold nothing she had worn like armor for a year, and not the fury she had walked in with. It was grief and relief, and a want a year old that had never once gone out. "I came home from abroad," she said, unsteady, the whole cold house watching, to find out my mother had waited until I was gone and bound the one person who ever saw me to my sister, on a debt she knew was paid, because she could not stand that the weapon she forged had wanted something for herself. I have spent a year being colder than I have ever been, because I decided that if I couldn't have the one true thing in this house, I would feel nothing at all. I was wrong to leave you in it a single day. Read me, right now, in front of all of them. And I breathed her in, the cold platinum and everything under it, and I told the truth into that hall the way my grandmother taught me with a warm brass spoon at my lips. Taste doesn't lie about what's really in it, and there's nothing cheap in you. There never was. I want to give you the moment the whole hall broke because I earned it. When I said that she was the only real thing the house had ever served me, Sabine Aumont, who the whole estate swore had never once wept, who had been forged precisely so that she would not, put her cold, beautiful face down against the top of my head in front of her mother and her sister and 3 countries' worth of important guests, and her shoulders went once, and I felt 2 years of my life and a year of hers, and a whole summer none of them had ever known about come loose all at once. And her mother said her name, Sharp, a command, the voice that had run that house for 40 years, Sabine. And Sabine Aumont lifted her head and did not let go of me and said without heat, the coldest warm thing I have ever heard. No, not anymore. You taught me to want nothing so that you would always hold the only leash that mattered. You forged a debt to keep me from the one person who ever tasted the difference. I am keeping her. I am leaving. We did not walk out of that dining hall into a clean, happy ending, because real lives do not fold up that neatly, and Madame Corisande Aumont does not lose gracefully. There were lawyers and a scandal that ran through 3 countries, and a version of the Aumont family that spent the next year deciding whether it could survive its eldest daughter walking out of it on the arm of the cook. But I want to give you the true end of it anyway, the one I earned standing at the side of that hall in an apron. Sabine Aumont walked away from her mother's house and half her mother's fortune, and she was for the first time in her life free and far poorer, and finally nobody's weapon. And she was better at being an ordinary person in love than either of us expected, because it turns out the thing the frost of the house had wanted, at 2 a.m. on a garden wall, was never the fortune at all. We opened a small place of our own, eventually, a kitchen with both our names on the door and no one's dead over it. And she brings me the world's lying dishes to taste for the truth. And I tell her every time exactly what's really in them. It took the better part of a year, the real version, before the two of us were simply 2 people with a kitchen and no cold house behind us. The scandal ran exactly as far as Madame Aumont had feared it would. A forged debt used to bind an orphan is the kind of thing that 3 countries' worth of important people enjoy being appalled by. And the Aumont name did not come out of it clean. Delphine married someone suitable within the year, and I am told she treats him precisely the way she once treated me. Madame Corisande Aumont kept her fortune and lost both her daughters, and lives now, I hear, in a great cold house with no one in it, inventorying things that no longer need counting, which is the only justice I have ever found that truly fit the crime. And Sabine Aumont, the frost of the house, the weapon her mother forged, learned to chop an onion badly and then well, and to laugh in daylight, and not only at 2 a.m, and to be, for the first time in her life, nobody's instrument. She was happier poor and free in mine than she had ever been as the cold air of everything, and she said so, often, with flour on her hands. I keep my grandmother's brass spoon on a hook by the pass in our own kitchen now, where I can reach it 100 times a service, and every time my fingers close around that warm, worn brass, I think about the 2 women who gave me everything I am. Nan, who taught me to taste the truth and to be brave enough to believe it. And Berta, who kept the proof of my freedom in a folder for 11 years and then, at 70, in her good coat, in front of the whole cold house, was braver than any of them. The place we run has both our names on the door, mine and Sabine's, and no one's dead over it. And when a supplier tries to sell us a watered thing dressed up as the real one, Sabine watches me taste it and name the lie. And she still, after everything, presses her thumb to that platinum watch out of an old habit. And then she takes it off and sets it down and laughs. People ask me now, because people do ask, after a thing like that happens at a table full of the people who run everything, how I could have spent 2 years paying off a debt I had never seen, how a girl who tastes the truth could have been fooled so completely. And I tell them the truth my grandmother gave me with a warm brass spoon at my lips. The tongue cannot be fooled, but they can keep you from the table. They can stand between you and the one dish that would tell you everything. And they had never once let me near the ledger, only ever told me the number in a cold inventory voice. And I believed it because it is very easy to make a frightened orphan believe she owes a debt to the rich. The gift was never the trick. The gift is tasting the truth over the plate they hand you, and being brave enough once to set the platter down at the great table and refuse to be sold. My name is Ione Rourke. I read taste. And the truth, in the end, gave me back the one person in that whole cold house who was ever real. And it never, not once, From a ruined sauce at midnight to a forged ledger at a formal dinner, told me a single lie.